Hi, welcome to the bathtub. You know me, it's the old Master Bather. Be careful how you pronounce it. Master Bather, Scott Bradfield. You can pronounce my name any way you want. Scoot Bernfeld. Some people call me Scoot Bernfeld. And Master Bather, you need to say that properly, or you get some people will roll their eyes if you say it incorrectly. So here we are, a few days after the election. We're a political show. Totally apolitical. You just leave your politics at the door. But because I'm the old masturbator and I have nothing better to do, occasionally I wear my T-shirt. That's the closest we get to political statements around here. And otherwise, we don't wear our politics on our sleeve except for this, and we don't even have any sleeves. Anyway, this is it's I don't want you to forget. For those who want to write down these Chinese characters, quick, write those down. Okay, did you get them? I think you got them. Okay, it's Pao Zhao, Jiao Shou. That's how they refer to me when I come off the plane in Beijing. They say Pao Zhao, Jiao Shou, and then they take me to the taxi cab. That's for Foamy Bathtubs Professor, with highly esteemed is in there somewhere. But I may have some of our bathing buddies who actually know Chinese, they may not see the highly esteemed part, but I feel it when I'm in China. That's how they regard me, as well they should. And we're here doing what we do best, which is to just waste an hour or so every day reading books that are no good for us. And if they are good for us, we read them in a way that they aren't good for us. That's one of our mottos. When we have a lot of mottos here at the bathtub, we're doing something here we like to call classical gas. We used to like to play Mason Williams's, cool classical gas song. We had a theme song. The bastards tried to sue us. We don't use the theme song anymore. I asked you in your head to play classical gas, that cool guitar solo of Mason Williams, just before I announced today's episode is about George Gissing. Now, my friend Klute's always making fun of me because I don't pronounce names right, and I kept meaning to look this up, but I always say George Gissing. Which means whatever I pronounce it is wrong. I'm looking up Wikipedia now. Gissing. I guess it's Gissing. I don't know. It's not Gissing. Gissing. I was afraid it would be Gissing just because I say it. I don't say that. George Gissing. Great London novelist. I have never read George Gissing before. I have always meant to read George Gissing. And New Grub Street I've had on my shelf for years and years and years, particularly when I lived in London, because it's about London, basically hacks, people who write for the newspapers and the magazines and literary periodicals, which are sort of a going thing in the late 1800s and early 20th century. And Gissing, and there were also novelists who wrote something called a triple-decker novel. I'm not familiar with this, so you can correct me here if you want. But they were basically you would write 3 volumes of a novel. People know Dickens used to write them in installments over a year, every month, or every 2 weeks for a year or 2 years. But these were just triple deckers where you would publish one book at a time in 3 volumes, and the books had to be a certain length so they could go into these lending libraries. So it was it was one of those things where the form sort of determined what you could do. It's just like sitcoms have to be 30 minutes or 24 minutes and space for 3 breaks in the commercials and so forth. So that's the most structural work we'll talk about here. So these novels were written. Gissing wrote quite a few of them. He seemed to write one a year, and then he wrote journalism. And New Grub Street is about these people who do these jobs of writing and their life in London. They almost all lived around my old neighborhood in Bloomsbury. I lived all over London, North London. They go into North London, which where all the poor people lived, and I lived there for a while. And then in my last 25 years, I was in Bloomsbury near King's Cross and Russell Square, and they're all living in that area, Tottenham Court Road, which was all, I guess, lots of bed sits and lots of cheap rooms. And I've always wanted to read it. He's the person who loved Gissing and always talked about him was Orwell. We've talked about George Orwell, a lot on the show. He was really fascinated by Gissing. You can see why when you read just one novel of Gissing's. And I think he liked to write about him as well. And also he was himself a hack who worked for all these different newspapers and periodicals to make a living. Even when I moved to London in the early 80s, there were still hack jobs. I mean, there still are. I still do reviews and stuff for London, more so than in the States. And there were a lot more of them, even in the 80s, the 1980s. But they're always local weekly newspapers, weekly news magazines, and a few cultural magazines. And the newspapers all had culture pages. Unlike America, we only have the New York Times, maybe, and maybe some smattering of short pieces here and there. The Washington Post book world, places that sort of still do a lot of book reviewing and so forth. But anyway, that's a little bit of the background on this book. This is sort of mid-career book of George Gissing. I had never read him before, and I totally loved it. It's a really, really good read. So we have a rating schedule here, a rating system here at the Bathtub. It's yeah, nay, and then there's a hell yeah. Most of them get the hell yeah. Henry James has worked his way up in my affections, and he's getting up into the high yays, but he's still not a hell yeah. This is a hell yeah. It's a terrific read. And it's about these different hacks living in London. They have different successes and levels of success. The central character is a guy named, what was his name? Reardon. And him and his wife. And Reardon is a young novelist. I think he's probably late 20s, early 30s. And he's published one or two novels. And he's writing his second or third novel in this 3-volume style so that he can sell it to these lending library publishers. And he really struggles to write, and he's not doing very well, and he doesn't get very well reviewed, and he doesn't sound like he's very good, really. And his book is largely, much like Orwell's Keep the Aspidistra Flying, if you've not read. That's one. I'm a mixed feelings about Orwell's novels. We've talked about it. Here's a cool paperback of it. I mean, this is Orwell's version of New Grub Street. It's very much about a writer living in London and working in crummy bookshops while he's working on books. It's a wonderful book. Keep the Aspidistra Flying. I don't like the title. And I don't know what more. I'm going to read a couple passages from this, but they all talk a lot about literature. They basically are it's largely about how they pay their bills and how they save on rent, and about the relationships between men and women, which are supposed to be romantic, but they're almost always based on some financial consideration. So one of the central couples in this are attracted to each other, but then they have to decide if they can afford to be married. There's a lot of dancing around that. And it's I want to say it's cynical. It's pretty hard-edged in its view of the world and of relationships in England at this time, as totally determined by how much money you have. If you don't have money, you're not going to be happy. If you have money, you're going to be okay. I'm going to read two quick passages because they do discuss literature, and literature is on their and on their minds, and they think of it as important or not important. And this is between an older man who's kind of awful, who thinks who doesn't think much of literature, and a young man who's named Jasper. The introduction to this book says that it's one of the few books where a character named Jasper in an English novel isn't a total villain. And he's not a total villain. He's cynical, but he's not a villain. This Jasper, who's going to be a significant character in the book, says to this old guy that literature serves a good purpose. And the older guy says, what purpose? It helps to spread civilization. Civilization, exclaimed John scornfully. What do you mean by civilization? Do you call it civilizing men to make them weak, flabby creatures with ruined eyes and dyspeptic stomachs? Who is it that reads most of the stuff that's poured out daily by the ton from the printing press? Just the men and women who ought to spend their leisure hours in open-air exercise, the people who earn their bread by sedentary pursuits, and who need to live as soon as they are free from the desk or the counter, not to moon over small print. They should live rather than moon over small print. Your board schools, your popular press, your spread of education, machinery for ruining the country, that's what I call it. This guy, he's the whole businessman. He says, people should be out exercising and making themselves strong for civilization, not wasting their minds like we are doing, frankly, in the bathtub every day. Okay? So there's one. I'll read one last passage because the characters all... One of the worst things that happens to the characters often in these books is they have to sell their books. So these guys who are writers or literary people love their bookshelves. And when they're broke or they have to move or they need to pay the rent, they're often selling their books. And here's a little brief description of how, I think it's Reardon and his wife are having real problems. And he has to sell some books. This is what it looks like when he comes home and Reardon looks at his bookshelves. Reardon looked at the gaps left on his shelves. Many of those vanished volumes were dear old friends to him. He could have told you where he had picked them up and when, to open them, recalled a past moment of intellectual growth, a mood of hope or despondency, a stage of struggle. In most of them his name was written, and there were often penciled notes in the margin. Of course he had chosen from among the most valuable he possessed. Such a multitude must else have been sold to make this sum of £2.10. That's what he got for the books that are now gone. Books are cheap, you know. At need, one can buy a Homer for 4p, a Sophocles for 6p. It was not rubbish that he had accumulated at so small expenditure, but the library of a poor student, battered bindings, stained pages, supplanted editions. He loved his books, but there was something he loved more, and when Amy glanced at him with eyes of sympathy, he broke into a cheerful laugh. I'm only sorry they have gone for so little. Tell me when the money is nearly at an end, and you shall have more. So he still loves his wife at this point before they have some problems. Anyway, he writes, and similar to Orwell, very clear, very direct, very objective descriptions, really good narratives. You really get absorbed in these relationships between the different characters, particularly the relationships between men and women and kids and their parents, or young men and their parents, young women and their parents. And he can really put you in a dramatic situation that's not over the top, it's not overly dramatic, and it's just about the way these people live and try to get by, and you get really absorbed in the book. Anyway, I'm really enjoying it. I really strongly recommend New GRUB Street for those. Don't forget, we're moving into a new 4 years administration with the bathtub, and we're gonna bathe with a vengeance. That's our new motto. We're gonna bathe with a vengeance. Don't forget, just for an hour or two every day. I found this George Gissing, a biography, a critical biography. I just picked it up off eBay. It was in decent shape, and it wasn't too expensive. Jacob Korg. I'd never heard of Jacob Korg. It's not a long biography, maybe 250 pages, but I wanted to read about him, and I really enjoy this biography. It reminds me of when biographies aren't, there's the big standard important biographies, which are always 600-800 pages long, and sometimes too long. This is pretty short, and half of it is critical essays about the individual novels, which I skim through because I don't like to read about books, story plots, and hear what happens in the books until I read them myself. So I skip past that. But I'm really enjoying this biography. It's really well written, has a real affection for Gissing. He was a fairly young man. I think he lost his father when he was young, and he had to take care of his younger brothers. And he got in a relationship with a prostitute when he was fairly young. His first relationship, he married her. She was an alcoholic. And at one point when he was very young, he was a student, and he stole some things from fellow students and actually went to jail for a short time. And he has a great affection for all the characters in his books, from whatever order of society they're from. And he's clearly been in and out of all the different classes. And he spent some time in America as well. Anyway, really interesting writer. I've ordered some more Gissing, so I'm going to do some more reading of Gissing soon. And the biography I'm really enjoying. So there you go, classical gas. It's a hell yeah. They almost usually are hell yeahs. Bathe with a vengeance. That's our new motto here. Bathe with a vengeance, and then you can be pissed off the rest of the day, or you can do your political action, or send some money to somebody, or go do your job, take care of your families. We only do the bathing once, a little bit, short period of time every day, and we bathe with a vengeance. Don't forget. All right, stay safe.